This week marks 40 years since that recording of the song Do They Know It's Christmas, sung by some of the biggest names in music during the 1980s, and the charity single was made to help raise money for famine relief in Ethiopia particularly, and it was later re-recorded to help address other problems facing the continent. But the heart of the message has always been using music and privilege to do good.
It occurs to me that somebody once said, rock and roll will change the world.
That's lovely.
Every little sale will help, I promise you. God bless and have a happy Christmas.
The Band-Aid Charitable Trust was established to manage continued donations since then, including new earnings from music streaming platforms. The Trust's 2023 financial report states they've earned a total income of more than $223 million. But now, amid the release of a 40th anniversary mix, there's renewed scrutiny of the song's lyrics, some of the imagery as well, going back to those days, and critics have long believed it delivers a stereotypical, dehumanizing message about Africa and its people, and is doing more harm than good. Bob Geldof, one of the original Band-Aid organisers and chair of the Charitable Trust, says in response, quote, "This little pop song has kept millions of people alive. Why would Band-Aid scrap feeding thousands of children dependent on us for a meal?" And I'm joined by rapper Fuse ODG, who says the lyrics amplify stereotypes of Africa as a continent of poverty, famine and disease. You're invited, but did not take part in the 30th anniversary song in 2014, Fuse. And this latest version you wouldn't have got involved in for the same reasons. Can we just go back to the original song?
Yeah.
And what you thought of that in its time?
I think the original song and the intentions behind it were fantastic because there needed to be, an immediate action for a crisis that was happening at the time. And, I'm immensely grateful for the British public for, taking money out of their pocket to actually donate to help the crisis. So definitely it was a fantastic initiative. My perspective is that, 40 years later, we need to start looking at, the results of what we've achieved over time and see how I guess we can improve the model, because from my perspective, it was great that we, on surface level, were able to help the people in need in Ethiopia. But over the period of time, if we still have to, rely on aid in order to, support countries in Africa for our crisis, I think we need to start revising it because we need to start being self-sustainable as a continent. And another kind of issue that I had with the original model was that they pick one crisis in one country and they paint the whole of Africa as one image, and I think that's very detrimental to the whole of the continent.
So the immediate impact was good.
Fantastic.
It's become dated, effectively.
Exactly.
Give me a couple of examples of lyrics you have an issue with.
So there's a lyric that says, "No peace and joy in Africa this Christmas," and over Christmas now, over the past 15 years, that's where everybody goes. Everybody that I know go to Ghana for Christmas in December to have a great time for peace and joy, to escape the cold. So in 2014, when he asked me to be a part of it, I made it very clear to him that that's untrue because I've already booked my flight to go to Ghana. And, I tried to say to him that there's a way that we can raise money to help the Ebola crisis at the time and still maintain the dignity of the people. And he was so adamant about changing the model, and I felt like if you're trying to help someone, the best thing that you could do is actually start a dialogue and not just keep it a monologue where you say, this is the help that you need. Rather, just let's have a conversation because I'm an African, you're helping Africans. So the best person to listen to are the people who are going through it. So I made a suggestion that what if we change the lyrics to this, because the caliber of artists that are on the song will be able to still gather the people and still raise the money that needs to be raised. But he refused, and unfortunately I had to say no because it wasn't in alignment with my mission of wanting to reposition Africa as a place of investment, place of tourism, place of joy. So I had to say no, unfortunately.
So it doesn't reflect modern Africa, is what you're saying. It's lyrics that might have been useful at the time.
Yes.
And if you want to re-release it, you need to update it to reflect the current problem.
Exactly.
So he's being too historic.
Exactly. So, yeah, exactly. And that was my suggestion. And also the images that's associated with it. Again, on surface level, it was fantastic, initiative to help the people in crisis in Ethiopia. But I gave an example of the Ebola crisis. When the Ebola crisis happened, because of the image that's been put out there by initiatives like Band-Aid and the Western media, but Africa kind of being this one image of a place of famine, poverty, and disease field, when the Ebola outbreak broke out in Guinea, people started cancelling their flights in Kenya, which is like 6,000 kilometers apart, which is even greater than the width of the whole of Europe. But people still were cancelling their flights. So that's how dangerous it is, you know, in the long run, how it affects the whole continent whilst, you know, trying to deal with one crisis in one country.
What I'm interested in is your idea that it's started doing more harm than good. Yeah. Because Bob Geldof and all of those members involved in the music would say specifically, we raise this money, it goes directly to solve African problems. But you're saying that a side product of that is that Africa isn't receiving money in other ways.
Exactly.
So therefore, it's actually reducing the amount of money that Africans have.
Thank you very much for saying that.
No, I'm not saying it. I'm just
no, because that's you're echoing what.
But just explain that.
Exactly. So my point is, yes, we've raised in the short term, right, and it was fantastic at the time. 40 years later, what happened? The side effects of that was people refused to go to Africa to go on holiday. They'd rather give us £2 and move on with their lives, or
when they could have given you
2,000 or 3,000 in a, you know, as they do in LA or they do in IB.
And then Africa would be able to solve its own problem.
Exactly, because through, you know, revenue from tourism, trade, investment, we'll be able to be self-sustainable, because then we'll be able to, you know, the economy will be able to grow, you know, in a way where it's constructive for the people on ground. So therefore, if anything happens in the future, we'll be able to help ourselves. And not just that, I feel like the consequences of it affecting our collective pride and identity really has been super detrimental to the I guess the progression of the diaspora and the African continent. Because once you love yourself as a person, you want to know everything about who you are and where you're from. But because we've been so disconnected due to these kind of images, we've been disconnected from us, that we're disconnected from our problems. There's so many issues in Africa right now that the diasporans don't know about because they're so disconnected due to the fact that we're not super proud of who we are, due to what it's linked with. Over the past 10 years, the Afrobeats industry has gone crazy, booming. And as a result of that, Africans are now falling back in love with themselves. And we're now actually understanding what's really happening on ground. So there's a lot more support for things that are happening on ground than it was in 1984. So when I'm saying to him that, you know, there's a way to position Africa as a place of opportunity, because there's a whole proud nation, this whole proud, you know, diaspora that, you know, love their continent and want to do something about it. So even now, the flow of funds going back into the continent is 90 billion compared to aid, which is 50 billion. So we want to help, you know, ourselves. So we just need to have that dialogue to make it happen.
Do you think it's added to the problem of racism?
Do I think it's added to it's bigger than, so I think the problem is bigger than Band-Aid. Let's be very real about it. But the only reason why it's on Band-Aid is because they announced a re-release. So for me, it's like, okay, cool. You're just feeding into the problem that we currently have. We're trying to change, you know, the worldview of how people see us. So as a result, we need to show a positive side, which is our mission. We've even launched an educational app called Sona that allows us to tell the history of Africa and highlight Africa's contribution to the world. And I feel like, you know, this job that we're doing is going so well that I feel like this new re-release is setting us back.
Fuse ODG, thank you so much. We'll be speaking to Bob Geldof later on the network.
Thank you for having me.
It occurs to me that somebody once said, rock and roll will change the world.
That's lovely.
Every little sale will help, I promise you. God bless and have a happy Christmas.
That was David Bowie 40 years ago as Band-Aid officially launched worldwide. The movement uniting some of the biggest rock stars of all time with the goal of raising money to battle world hunger. Their song, Don't They Know It's Christmas, raised more than $10 million in its first year, and it went on to become a Christmas classic. And in the decades since, more than $223 million have been raised. This year alone, Band-Aid has funded 15 projects in Africa, providing things like access to healthcare, medicine, and emergency food supplies, helping more than 300,000 people. To mark 40 years, Band-Aid is releasing a special edition of the song, uniting the artists who've recorded it across 3 generations.
We hope to be able to raise in the region of £1 million, £1.5 million, with which we intend sending grain and drugs to the affected areas in Africa.
We cannot have in the 21st century people dying on our screens every night forever. This must stop.
All right, joining us now, the man who wrote the song and brought these people together for this cause, Band-Aid founder, Sir Bob Geldof. Sir, very grateful to have you on the show. Thank you for being here. So let's just start big picture here. What does it mean to you? You're marking 40 years of work here. Your charity's still undertaking many efforts across the globe. What do you hope what you bring in from this year's release can do in the world?
There's several things. I mean, I think the first part is that, speaking from a musician's point of view, the record is the arc of British rock over 40 years. I mean, from a very young Sting to a very young Harry Styles, from a young Bono to a middle-aged Bono to an older Bono, all those dead people that we remember, Sinead O'Connor, George Michael, David Bowie, the people from One Direction, all that sort of thing. So that's it, and it's an extraordinary. I actually think I'm very moved by it. It's Trevor Horn produced it. I think it's a work of art, and the video director who did the last Beatles video, who brought the Beatles together, I asked him to put these 3 generations into one room and have them all singing together for one reason: human empathy, human compassion, because those things still go on around the world. I wake up every morning to possibly 10 or 12 emails describing horror. And this morning was the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations in Port Sudan, where our ships used to dock for the things, talking about the mass rape of girls and women and how the people in fancy chairs will talk about it, but they will reach out to people who actually do things. And the understanding that these broken, damaged mothers who stagger over the borderline with their panicked, exhausted children, that Band-Aid will be there to meet them and try and put back these bodies and give back this dignity and offer a future of some hope and a life. The horrors of the world continue. There's nothing Band-Aid can really do about that. But to put Band-Aid in context, as you said earlier, we started with this little pop song, and then next minute, Michael Jackson and Harry Belafonte call me and say, we want to do it in America, will you come over? And then the Canadians, and then the Dutch and the French and the Norwegians. And that all leads to the Live Aid concert, and suddenly the world is with you. And we got, I think, in total about, in today's money, $450–60 million. And of course, the lobby created then gives us direct access to politics. So 20 years after that, we do Live Aid with Beyonce and Jay-Z and Will Smith and Snoop Dogg and all the stars of that period. And we address in the highest global structures of politics and economics the economic injustices of the world with the Make Poverty History campaign, from that little pop song you've just seen. And so there is a celebratory nature to this. We were able to address structural issues. We still do. Every time we bring out this song, this is the 4th time, the access to politicians and those structures is open again. And we can talk about the abiding circumstances in which human beings should never, ever have to exist.
Sir, all those points very much well taken. You mentioned politics, and this has given you access to the political world. There have been some politics around the re-release of this song. The artist Ed Sheeran said that if he had been asked about being included on this mix, he would have respectfully declined. And it's in no small part, the lyric reads, "Where nothing ever grows, no rain or rivers flow, do they know it's Christmas time at all?" The insinuation being that these lyrics are colonial, and that he can't support that. Fuse ODG, of course, writing the letter that Ed Sheeran signed on to. Have you been able to speak with Ed Sheeran? I know you said that there was reporting you had tried to reach out to him. What do you say to him?
I mean, half the virtue of this record maybe more than half, is that as opinions and sensibilities and knowledge change, often as a result of this record, so does the debate, so does the argument, and that's part of the political process of this. So right now, the debate on Africa in Britain, and hopefully in the United States, will be elevated. It's very hard to get this argument into the current political climate. It's very hard. So this record then and its oppositionists bring that debate up to a level. And genuinely, seriously, I believe that's as important a part of this, because it allows us then to have a cultural dialogue, which again makes politicians answerable to all those points. So to be specific to your answer, Ed is a really clever man. He's a really good bloke. He's a great artist. I've put in the call. We'll have a conversation. We may disagree, we may agree, but we'll work it out. And that's exactly what this should be. Meanwhile, Band-Aid will deal with that hungry child, that damaged person, that education, that sheltering. Tonight, without any question, there is somebody going to bed a little warmer, a little better fed, with the hope of an education going forward. We are talking about a part of the world that has just come out of, yet again, a civil war that is constant. And when we started in the 80s, the longest running war of the 20th century, the damage, 600,000 people killed over the last 18 months. I mean, who knows about that? I know CNN were there. I know they reported on it, but who else was there? In Sudan currently, the United Nations reckons that 2.9 million people this year alone in the mass slaughter will be either wounded, broken, their houses ruined. I think CNN reported 4 weeks ago, about a militia who showed up in a town, rounded up every male from 10 years on, killed them all, and then the mass rape began. And then they herded the women out in ethnic cleansing, saying, we don't want any blacks in Sudan. Sudan is a country half the size of the United States. This is the truth and the reality happening, and we deal with that absolute truth every day.
Yeah. Sir, I do want to show you my colleague, Max Foster, spoke with Fuse ODG just about an hour or so ago on this network. Let me just show you a little bit of what he said, and I'd love to hear what you think. Watch this.
Do you think it's added to the problem of racism?
The problem is bigger than Band-Aid. Let's be very real about it. But the only reason why it's on Band-Aid is because they announced a re-release. So for me, it's like, okay, cool. You're just feeding into the problem that we currently have. That I feel like this new re-release is setting us back.
It's setting us back, he says. What do you say?
Sorry, I can't see or hear that very well. So do you tell me what he said?
Sure. So my colleague asked if he believed that it was perpetuating racism. And while he did not say that directly, he said the problem is bigger than Band-Aid. Let's be real. The reason why it's on Band-Aid is because they announced a re-release. You're just feeding, one second, please. You're just feeding into the problem that we currently have. That is this new re-release. It's setting us back.
Well, 100%. What the first part of what you said. The second part is an argument. His argument is Africa must and will stand on its own feet, 100%. So beyond Band-Aid, I instigated Prime Minister Tony Blair's Commission for Africa. I sat on that for a year with the leaders of the North and South, and that became the agenda for the 2005 G8, where Kofi Annan said the Rubicon crossing moment for Africa had just occurred. President Obasanjo of Nigeria said this redefines the conversation between the global North and global South. So that was 2005. I then went on to sit on Kofi Annan's Africa Progress panel for 12 years with President Obasanjo of Nigeria, Kabaruka of Ghana, the economist, Tijidan Tian of Cote d'Ivoire, Bob Rubin, Bill Clinton's Treasury Secretary, Michel Candazu, President of the IMF, and Peter Eigen, who's the founder and chair of Transparency International. Kofi and I and the others traveled throughout the continent and throughout Europe lobbying for exactly what Fuse is saying. I 100% go along with that. And then subsequently, in the middle of the crash in 2008, because Africa was not getting any investment, I raised an investment fund of $200 million. Not much. I wanted 800 million, but because of the crash, couldn't get any more. But with all full African investment partners and managers, we set up in 8 countries. We employed at our height 11,000 workers, which in turn gave benefit to 140,000 dependents and others, and proved the point that people are the same everywhere. You inject the oil of cash into an economy and people fly. We brought in workers' rights, trade unions' rights. We structured and formalized accountability and general financial accounting. So I'm 100% with the argument. But tonight, the United Nations are calling for the mass rape of women and girls to stop, and for people not in their fancy chairs, not the elite, not the privileged with the arguments, to please do something about it. Band-Aid does. And tonight, again, of the 600 million people who are starving in the world, 300 million are in Africa. That's the truth. That's the truth. Of the 700 million suffering from extreme poverty, that is living on less than $2.15 a day. There's 700 million in the world, unnecessarily. Over 2/3 of those people are in sub-Saharan Africa. So for them to be able to get Africa going and on its feet, they must be alive. And over the course of 40 years, hundreds of thousands of people, probably millions, are alive because of a little pop song. That is a ridiculous way to run the world, and it should stop. But while it doesn't, we will keep getting the greatest artists of our time, putting them together, and doing this little song, which I think a newspaper called 2 weeks ago, perhaps the most powerful song in rock and roll history. We didn't mean it to be, but maybe.
Well, Sir Bob Geldof, very grateful for your time today, and of course for all of the work that you have done over the course of your life. Thank you so much. And we are going to leave our viewers with some of this original Band-Aid song from 40 years ago. We'll be right back.